Hi everyone. Normally I'm used to being stood here in the middle of Manchester somewhere where they can't afford this space, so this will be interesting. Right. I work for Barclays, big, large, massive bank, and I'm going to talk today about optimizing for understanding. I'm sure, as you can identify, in a decently sized company, sometimes it's hard to understand what everyone's saying. But first things first. Yep, my name's Callum Fraser. I'm JavaScript lead at Barclays Bank in the Manchester office, and there's some things if people want to follow me or whatever. So yeah, sometimes things can be so obvious that we don't even think about them, but they can have a massive effect on our lives. So good examples are walking and breathing. I don't need to remember to take one step in front of the other, but I somehow manage it every day, just about. And I don't need to remember to breathe. Except when I'm underwater when I need to remember not to, but again, at this point I'm quite good at it. Not to brag. But it's very, very easy to make assumptions about things, and something that's obvious like danger, there's water in the pool. Well, we're trying to tell you not to fall in the pool. We're not telling you there's water in a swimming pool. Of course there's water in a swimming pool. So sometimes it can be misinterpreted, misrepresented, and this can lead to confusion. So to give an example of something that might be a bit less obvious to all of us here, but is very obvious to anyone who works with Formula One, if you bought a Formula One car, plonked it right in front of us here, nobody in this room would be able to start it. If you turned the equivalent of the ignition, it would not start, it would not work at all. Does anyone know why? It's a long shot. Exactly. So, well, there's two reasons actually. It's a bit of a lie to say there's only one reason, but yeah, they don't have starter engines, and like you said, you need to warm it up first. Formula One cars, actually, they're optimized so well that they're completely seized when they're not at 80 degrees Celsius. So before you actually start the car, you have to warm the engine up, which feels daft given, you know, engines are quite good at warming themselves up. But you know, it's obvious if you're a mechanical engineer and stuff like that, but it's not so obvious if you're not. It's really hard to read this in here, so I'm going to stand here. But the thing I'm trying to posit here is that being able to understand things massively affects how good we are at doing our jobs. Like I've said before, I work at a bank, a massive company that has so many three-letter abbreviations. They have, I think, 3 or 4 different glossaries, and that's just for the section I work in, because one glossary apparently isn't enough. So there's so much that can be easily misunderstood, or if I accidentally type the wrong thing and on my phone and it corrects it, suddenly I'm telling them to change something completely different because it's a 3 different letters abbreviation. So how do we optimize for understanding? Because hopefully everyone here, I'll go through in a bit more detail, but hopefully everyone agrees that the better we can understand this, the better everything will be. So I guess the first thing I need to run through is kind of why. I've explained it a little bit already, but if you don't understand what it is you're doing or how it is you're going to do it, it's very hard to make it. It's very hard to explain it. Then because of those two, it's extremely hard to modify it, and it's almost impossible to check. If I can't tell you how the form on a web page or my phone is supposed to work, I'm sure as hell not going to be able to change it, check it, or explain it. Assuming I even know what I meant to be talking about in the beginning. So kind of another illustration. Everyone here reading these 2 things. So I'm asked to drive from London to Manchester, and I'm asked to add search capabilities to a website. Has anyone got the first thing that they do in these 2 cases? It's the first thing you'd do. Anyone? Google it. Okay, that's not too bad. Yeah. Any others? Okay, what questions would you ask?
I don't know, what are we driving from Manchester?
Okay, yeah.
When?
That's an important one. When? I didn't say when. Do you have to do it right now? Or is it in 6 months' time? But the funny thing is, for that top one, I think everyone does kind of go to, right, I'll Google it, I'll figure my way out, might work out where I'm going, but also I'm going to ask questions like when. I think if we think about this second one that's more kind of software related, people tend to go straight to, oh, I'll just do it. I'll just jump straight in the car and drive. Well, actually, I wanted you to go in a taxi. Oh, crap. That's not great. So yeah, verify what you're actually expected to do. You know, the first thing we want to do is, well, where in Manchester, when, what needs to be searchable? You know, Google has a decent job so far of searching websites. Why do we need to add it, this one specifically? We might not. They might just want to tell the customer what they wanted to search. Okay, cool. Go to Google. It does it for us, for the most part. So the second question, and I don't think anyone asked this, but you know, you can analyze what exists as well. You can then say, well, can I get the train? You said car, but does that really matter? Or is that somebody's made an assumption, maybe not documented it, and said, oh yeah, you have to get a car because I would have drove. I was like, well, yeah, but I can't drive. So can I get the train? Or do I have to find a taxi or something like that? And again, like I said, is Google search not enough? What's this extra functionality we're adding on top of Google? It's easy to take those kind of questioning steps and thinking about that bigger picture for granted. But I think they're very, very important because you can't fully understand something until you know exactly what you're meant to be doing. Don't get me wrong, with things like Agile and stuff like that, we can kind of have a hash of it and figure it out. But the more we understand at the beginning, the less of that we have to do as part of the process. So, yeah, so I've kind of covered these first 2 points. So how do we actually understand something a little better? Well, you know, we can verify what we're meant to be doing, asking those questions. We can document the assumptions that we make. It's amazing when you start just writing out the assumptions that you make, how much stuff just gets picked up instantly. This applies quite heavily to dev at the moment, but I will split it out into other parts. So sorry if it's a bit too dev specific. You can analyze what already exists. If you know 90% of it already exists, then I only need to do that 10%. I've saved myself a lot of work there. Same process. Identify what you actually got that's missing. Then make the change. Okay, I need to do 10% of the work. That's great. Do it, and then rinse and repeat. Re-verify. Okay, is that what they actually wanted? Some of this is kind of intrinsically built into Agile, but people don't think about it like this. They think about it more like, oh, I've got my sprints and my stand-ups, and something will come on the board if there's a problem with it. Well, this process is happening. We're just not necessarily directly realizing for everything we do. So I mentioned earlier that you can apply this to lots of different things, not just specifically development work. You can apply this to things like tasks. So the one that always really annoys me, like I said, I work where there's acronyms all over the place. The amount of times I get an FYI email from somebody in a different team that uses 4 different acronyms, I have no idea what it is, and it turns out they're telling me that a deployment to their system I don't care about has been made. But I still need to read the whole email and then go and quickly Confluence search for the 2 or 3 terms because I might not know exactly what's going on. But when we do things like making tasks and also when we make emails and stuff like that, the first time you use an acronym, just put in brackets what it is. It takes you an extra 15 seconds, but now you can guarantee when you send it to somebody, assuming they know what those 3 words mean or 5 words, they can probably get the general gist of what you're talking about. This kind of then goes to the second point. You assume no knowledge. Yes, the people you're originally sending this email to might know exactly what you're talking about, but the 2 people that it gets forwarded on who maybe do the work might not. Hopefully somebody adds that context in, but if it's going to take, again, another 30 to 40 seconds to quickly explain that, you're saving minutes worth of conversations or a meeting which takes, what, collectively an hour of everyone's time, you know, when you add them all up. Simplify and specify criteria. Mark out what is relevant to the task that's needed and what's just some additional context that might be useful but is not directly affecting what they're doing and why. When you're reading, check the documentation. I've got a question for all the devs at least here. In theory, what's the best documentation of a piece of software?
The code.
Okay, the code. The tests. I'd say the tests. They should be. They're testing it. They never are. Don't get me wrong. The code's the answer everyone would use, but we should be saying that everyone here should be saying the tests. At least, again, as a developer anyway. Anyone else, you'd probably be saying the Confluence documentation. But yeah, anyway. Ask questions when you're reading. I don't fully understand it. Tell somebody, oh, I'm making an assumption about this bit here. If it turns out you're right, cool, add it into the document. Highlight your assumptions. We're all making assumptions all the time, but nobody ever really says it. I mean, hopefully everyone here is great and perfect. And that when meetings we all say, I'm assuming X, I'm assuming Y, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people here aren't. Please prove me wrong. I might put my CV in. So now we go on to kind of code. A lot of the principles that I've got there in the writing side are all about just keeping things as simple and as understandable as possible. Most of the solid principles are all about just making things more predictable, understandable, easy to use. The same with keep it simple. I mean, it's literally in the, ironically, the two abbreviations there, I've not put brackets around and explained. I did do that on purpose. Honest. First time I didn't. Now I keep it there intentionally. But yeah, and the memory test. This is what I call it, at least. The idea of the memory test, if no one knows, the general idea is I could write some code or I could write an email. Can I still understand it 6 months later or a year later? Or can someone else understand it 2 years later when I'm realistically probably gone and somebody else is in my place? Or I've moved, up the corporate ladder and somebody else is doing that and they can't ask me because I'm not available. That one's really important. That's why we make these things as understandable as possible, both for code, for tests, for emails, for everything. Because nobody ever thinks about that. Like, I'm sure all the developers here, or anyone who's ever written any code, looks back at their code 2 years later and thinks, oh God, what was I doing? I knew nothing. But that happens in your day-to-day job as well. You just don't necessarily realize it. Let's have a look. Yeah, reading. If you need to understand something, again, read the tests. I'd argue that's the best place for your documentation. If it's not, you need to make them better. Ask questions. And then if all else fails and you really can't understand it, then debug. That's not the ideal place to go. It's delving a bit too deep. So understanding tests. I'm starting to work on an idea in the back of my head around another talk I want to do about making like how to write better tests. But I've not demoed it to any testing meetups around Manchester or anything yet. So as far as I'm concerned, it's useless. But I think that tests should document the capabilities of the software. The description should say why you're testing it, not what you're testing. I can see in the test that you're testing that A equals A. What I want to know is why, because that's context I wouldn't get if I was just reading the test, which is, let's be honest, if the test fails, the first thing we do is read the test. So I get what you're testing, now I need to know why, and if the description of the test explains that, I'm quids in. I don't need to check a load of documentation. I don't need to then go and speak to 5 people to figure it out. It's easier said than done. I'm not saying all this stuff's easy. Assume no knowledge. Again, when you're writing these things out, just try and understand, like, what if a junior developer or a new person comes to the business and their first day is to read whatever this is, whether it's an email or test or code. Are they going to be able to understand that? If not, that's not ideal. And then question smells. I'm not sure if everyone, I refer to smells a lot in code. So that's things that, for want of a better phrase, they stink. Something's wrong. I'm going down this rabbit hole and I shouldn't be even going near it. Question them. Why are we doing this weird 3 loops inside each other thing? Because nobody should ever have to do that. There's a better way, but it just needs rethinking about. The same with tests. Again, reading, ask questions, debug. You're going to see a lot of commonalities across here as I kind of break out into these different sections. This is another one I want to play with. I'm a lead. So at Barclays, I'm in charge of a small team of developers. This happens all the time. The main thing I spend my time doing most of the time, and the thing I think I'm particularly good at, is identifying when two people haven't talked. It feels like as a lead, that's part of like a decent chunk of our job. Again, maybe other leads in the room might not have ever experienced this, and credit where credit's due. But I'm constantly saying, this person, have you spoken to this person? Because we've had separate conversations about the exact same thing. And either you're differing in your opinion or you're the same, but weren't aware that those two people needed to talk. Each member has a different set of knowledge, experience, skills, roles, context. And this is where, making sure that everyone understands as much as possible is great. Because the more that everyone can share these things, both amongst each other, but just use as well. If somebody's particularly good at something, we've got two big options here. We can try and, help them develop somebody else, or we can just go, well, actually, we need this quickly, so you do it, and we'll teach them later. But it's that idea of understanding people and how they work, and what's going to work well and what's not going to work well. This one's very hard. I'm never going to get this one, I suspect, and I don't think anyone will. But the better we can get at this one, the better teams work together. So for me, look at the time. Okay, I'm close. So understanding is a skill. Everything is a skill. I saw a tweet recently, that I retweeted. Somebody said that they hate the term soft skills because it discredits some of the most important thing for developers to know. So, talking to people, dealing with situations, those things always, they're soft skills. You don't need to worry about that. I've never been in an interview where somebody has said, have you ever done a presentation, or have you ever done this thing? It's always, have you used this JavaScript tech thing? Well, I can teach somebody that. I don't care. I want to know, can they speak to people? Can they understand? Do they listen? Because that's important. If they understand it, I can teach them how to do it. That's a fair bit easier than teaching somebody how to listen. It's a hard skill, but it is a skill. You can teach it. It's important. Hopefully at this point, I've emphasized that enough. It's efficient. We'll waste less time in meetings, less time deploying things that turns out isn't right. But it is very hard. Understanding takes a lot of effort. It takes those sitting in, sending out emails with 3 abbreviations every time. It's a slog. But if everyone does it, it becomes massively, massively helpful. Has anyone got any questions? No? Good. Hopefully everyone understood.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
What's the thing you're trying to understand right now within work?
Specifically with our work, the deployment pipelines, banks are, to say slow and backwards would imply that sometimes you work slowly. Yeah, but our team in Barclays is one of the better ones with regards to some things, but yeah, we have a DevOps team, which is what's it called? A fallacy. You can't have a team that does DevOps. That's not how it works. That's just 2 words joined together that mean nothing. So at the moment, trying to understand that, and people. Like I said, I became a lead fairly recently. I've been doing it about 2 years now, officially a year and a bit. And for me, that's the most important one. If you can, as a manager, if you can understand the people and what's needed to help everyone on your team, you're going to get a lot better engagement and you're going to get a lot better performance. And it feels nice as well. That's the thing I've always enjoyed. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Are there any techniques for understanding that you recommend?
The biggest one I struggle with is listening. I'm a talker. I fill dead air, you may have noticed. I really struggle with listening personally. There are Pluralsight videos and that kind of stuff. I think you have to be quite self-analytical, but I think everyone should be. I think we're all here to do a job. Nobody wants to sit here and not get better and not improve and not get, let's be blunt, paid more to an extent. I think being self-analytical and constantly trying to improve yourself helps.
So you talked about soft skills and being able to know each person in your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you thought about how you transfer knowledge to a place yourself? So it's one thing hiring new people or changing team members.
Mhm.
What if you were leaving and you had to transfer that knowledge of each team member, what each person in the team brings?
So you mean, as I was to leave, how would you
replace yourself?
Replace myself?
Because I completely agree with what you said. A lot of being a lead is knowing each person in the team.
Mhm.
When you have tasks, the right people working the right thing. Some might have worked a lot, spent a lot of time in a certain process, and giving that person that ticket and being able to say, okay, you work with that person, because that person's skills in front end, back end. So that knowledge, what do you think is the best efficient process to transfer that knowledge? Someone else is taking your place if you're going at the corporate level.
Yeah, so when I left my previous role, Late Rooms, and to join Barclays, there wasn't anyone to hand over. But when I took the role from someone else that time, I joined in with the one-to-ones, and we had a kind of transitional period. That helps a lot. If you don't have that, it is a lot more difficult. I found that when you start empowering the team members themselves and making sure they're aware of what they're good at and what they're not good at, but also it's all great and well telling somebody you're bad at this, but actually then them going, no, but I'd need to work on it as well. So that hopefully when the next person takes over, if you can't hand that over, they're willing to go, no, I do have this problem. And some of that's by just leading by example, I think. So, I always try and strive to admit, hey guys, I fucked up here. Pardon the language, sorry. I'm not very good with language. I messed up, and just being honest about that and expecting that of your team as well. Hopefully they'll be more open. Fostering a good environment helps as well. People are more willing to admit their flaws if they know they're not going to be judged about that. It's a hard one though, yeah.